Moving into a new home was supposed to be an exciting fresh start. My wife Emily and I had spent years saving up, meticulously planning every step, until we could finally leave behind the relentless hum of city life for something quieter, something more stable. The suburbs seemed like the perfect answer. Our 3-year-old son, Oliver, was the biggest reason we made the decision. We wanted him to grow up in a place where he could play outside without the constant background noise of sirens and traffic, where the streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, friendly neighbors, and the kind of childhood we had always envisioned for him. The moment we pulled up to 341 Fairview Lane, I felt a strange sensation settle in my chest. The house was exactly as it had appeared in the photos. 2 stories, a wraparound porch, a neatly paved driveway leading to an attached garage. But there was something else, a subtle weight in the air, an almost imperceptible stillness that made me pause. Emily, on the other hand, was thrilled. She stepped out of the car, stretching her arms with a satisfied sigh, already imagining the backyard barbecues and cozy winter mornings by the fireplace. Oliver giggled from his car seat, reaching eagerly for the door. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at me. Maybe it was just exhaustion from the move, maybe it was nothing, but deep down, I knew better. Maybe it was nothing, but deep down, I knew better. The house itself was beautiful. 2 stories with a charming wraparound porch, its white paint slightly weathered, lending it an inviting but aged charm. The front yard was well manicured, with neatly trimmed bushes lining the cobblestone path that led up to the front door. In the backyard, a towering oak tree spread its branches wide, casting long shadows across the grass as the sun dipped lower in the sky. A swing set, faded but still sturdy, stood as a relic of the previous owners, waiting for Oliver to discover it. As we unloaded our moving truck, the neighborhood felt welcoming at first. An elderly woman across the street watched us from her porch, offering a small wave before returning to her knitting. A middle-aged man in a windbreaker walked past with his golden retriever, giving us a polite nod, but not stopping. A younger couple, Matt and Claire, who lived 2 houses down, approached with warm smiles. Claire held a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said cheerfully. "Moving days are exhausting. Thought you could use a little sugar boost." "That's really nice of you," Emily replied, accepting the cookies with a grateful smile. "We're just trying to get everything inside before dark." Matt chuckled. "Yeah, this street gets pretty dark at night. Not a lot of streetlights out here." I took a glance up and realized he was right. The only source of light at night would be the porch lamps and whatever ambient glow filtered through from neighboring houses. By sunset, exhaustion had fully settled in. The living room was still cluttered with unpacked boxes, the dining table buried under layers of packing paper. The hallway was a maze of half-assembled furniture and misplaced lamps. But at least Oliver's room was mostly set up, his bed positioned near the window, the walls freshly painted a soft blue, and his favorite stuffed animal scattered across the new bedding. As I tucked him into bed, he pulled the blanket up to his chin and looked toward the large window overlooking the backyard. "Do you think I can see the stars from here?" he asked, his voice tinged with drowsy wonder. His small hands clutched the edge of the blanket as he blinked up at me sleepily. I smiled, smoothing his hair back. "Maybe if we leave the curtains open a little." Outside, the yard stretched into darkness. The swing set now nothing but a silhouette against the trees. The air had turned cooler, the night silent, aside from the distant chirping of crickets. Everything about the evening felt right. Peaceful, promising, like the start of something good. Until that first night. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise. It was faint, almost like a whisper carried through the vents. I sat up in bed, listening intently. Emily stirred beside me but didn't wake. The house was old, so I chalked it up to settling noises and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard it again. A soft creaking, followed by a rustling sound coming from downstairs. I slowly climbed out of bed, careful not to wake Emily, and made my way toward the staircase. The hallway was eerily quiet, and every step I took felt unnervingly loud against the wooden floors. Peering over the banister, I saw nothing but the dark outline of our still cluttered living room. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe I was just tired. But my gut told me otherwise. The next day, I decided to do a full walkthrough of the house, just to familiarize myself with every corner. The attic was mostly empty except for a few forgotten boxes. The garage was standard, filled with tools and some old holiday decorations left behind. But the basement, it was locked. Not just locked, but secured with an old padlock that seemed completely out of place in a suburban home. Did the realtor say anything about a locked basement? I asked Emily later that afternoon. She frowned. No, that's weird. Should we call and ask? I hesitated. I wasn't sure why, but something about that locked door unsettled me. Instead of calling, I decided I'd pick up some bolt cutters the next day and open it myself. That evening, while putting Oliver to bed, I caught movement outside through his window. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of a tree, but then I saw him. A man standing just beyond our backyard fence, staring toward the house. He was completely still, his features obscured by the dim light. My heart pounded. I immediately rushed downstairs, grabbed a flashlight, and went out through the back door. By the time I got outside, he was gone. I shined the flashlight over the fence, scanning the tree line beyond. Nothing. Just silence. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, maybe a neighbor cutting through yards. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The next morning, after dropping Oliver off at preschool, I went to the hardware store and bought a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. My hands were sweating as I approached the locked basement door. Something about this felt wrong, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, won over. It took some effort, but the lock finally snapped, and the door creaked open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Stale air, damp concrete, and something else. Something metallic. The basement was mostly empty, except for a single wooden chair positioned in the center of the room. The walls were bare except for deep scratch marks, as if someone had clawed at them repeatedly. My stomach turned. Then I saw it, a small metal box tucked into the corner. I opened it. Inside were Polaroid pictures, dozens of them. They were of people, some blurred, some clearly taken without their knowledge, all of them in various places around our house. The last few photos were taken inside the house, and the most recent one, a picture of Oliver's bedroom. When Sarah and I inherited my uncle's house, it felt like a dream come true. We had been married for just over a year, and although we had talked about buying a home, we weren't financially ready for it yet. Then came the news. My late uncle, Richard, had left his house to me in his will. It was an old colonial-style home in upstate New York, nestled in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by towering trees. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but we quickly learned that not all gifts come without a cost. Then I saw it, a small metal box tucked into the corner. I opened it. Inside were Polaroid pictures, dozens of them. They were of people, some blurred, some clearly taken without their knowledge, all of them in various places around our house. The last few photos were taken inside the house, and the most recent one, a picture of Oliver's bedroom. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, Sarah and I settled into bed early. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to use the bathroom. On my way back to bed, I passed by the staircase and noticed something odd. The front door was slightly ajar. My heart pounded. I knew I had locked it before bed. I was sure of it. The deadbolt was even still extended, but the door was open a few inches. I stepped closer, peering into the dark hallway beyond the threshold. The night outside was silent, no wind, no movement, just the overwhelming stillness of the trees beyond the porch. I slowly shut the door, locked it again, and checked the house. Nothing seemed out of place. Maybe I hadn't closed it all the way? Maybe the old wood had expanded and it had nudged open? That's what I told myself as I climbed back into bed. I didn't tell Sarah. I should have. 2 nights later, I woke up to a different sound. Footsteps. Inside the house. I lay still, my body tense, listening. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the hardwood floor downstairs. My first thought was that Sarah had gotten up for water, but when I turned my head, she was still beside me, breathing softly in her sleep. My stomach twisted. Someone was inside. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but then came another sound. A quiet rustling, like someone moving through our things. I needed to act. Carefully, I slid out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat I had leaned against the closet after moving in. My heart hammered as I tiptoed toward the bedroom door, listening for any sign of movement. Then, silence. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles ached. Eventually, I forced myself to move, creeping down the hallway, trying to ignore the way my pulse roared in my ears. When I reached the top of the stairs, I peered into the darkness below. The living room was shadowed in the faint glow of the moon through the bay windows. No movement, no sound. I held my breath and took one slow step down, then another. Then, a sudden creak from the kitchen. I spun toward the noise, raising the bat instinctively, my breath caught in my throat. But the kitchen was empty. The back door, however, was wide open. I locked the door, checked the entire house, and found nothing missing. No signs of forced entry. Sarah woke up to find me pacing the living room, my face pale. I told her everything. We called the police. They came, looked around, and found no evidence of a break-in. The officer, a tall man with tired eyes, gave me a long look before saying, "Sometimes people forget to lock their doors. It happens." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that wasn't it, that I had heard someone in our house, but I had no proof, no security cameras, no missing items, just my word against silence. We installed better locks that day, but it didn't stop them. The last time it happened, we almost didn't make it out. It was a Friday night. Sarah and I had stayed up watching a movie, trying to shake the unease that had settled over the house like a shadow. Around midnight, she went to bed, and I stayed up a little longer, scrolling through my phone in the dim glow of the living room lamp. Then, a sound just outside the window. I froze. It was soft but distinct, a shuffle, a breath. I turned my head slowly, my skin crawling. And there, beyond the glass, a face, pale, expressionless, watching me. I bolted up, knocking over my glass of water. The figure outside moved, disappearing into the darkness. I grabbed the bat, ran to the door, but something stopped me. The front door was already unlocked. And then from upstairs, Sarah screamed. I sprinted up the stairs, my blood turning to ice. I threw open the bedroom door to find her backed against the wall, her eyes wide in terror. "The closet," she whispered. "There's someone in the closet." I turned, heart pounding, and saw the closet door, slightly ajar. Without thinking, I lunged, yanking it open with all my strength. Empty. But on the floor, a muddy footprint. We left that night. We didn't take anything, didn't pack. We just grabbed our phones, our wallets, and ran. We never went back. It was about 3 years ago when we first moved in, eager to start a new chapter in our lives. Sarah and I had been renting a tiny apartment in the city, constantly surrounded by noise, traffic, and the suffocating feeling of being crammed into a space too small for comfort. When we finally saved enough for a down payment, we jumped at the chance to move to the suburbs. A place where we could breathe, where we could have a yard, and maybe even start a family someday. The moving day was chaotic, with boxes scattered everywhere and furniture still needing to be placed. By evening, Sarah was in the kitchen, unpacking dishes, while I took a break to haul out the trash. As I stepped outside, stretching my sore back, I noticed someone on the porch next door. He stood still, leaning slightly against the wooden railing, watching me. An older man, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s, with thinning gray hair and deep lines cutting through his gaunt face. He wore a faded flannel shirt, unbuttoned at the top, his frame rigid as if he had been standing there for a long time. I hesitated for a moment before offering a polite nod, expecting a wave or some kind of acknowledgement in return. But he just stared, his expression unreadable, his gaze unwavering. A prickling sense of discomfort crawled over me. I turned away, tossed the trash bag into the bin, and walked back inside. Before closing the door, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. He was still there, still watching. Over the next few days, Sarah and I got settled in. We met a few other neighbors, all of whom were friendly, welcoming us with small conversations and casual waves as they walked their dogs. But the man next door, he never approached us, never spoke, and yet, he was always there. I'd catch him watching from his window when I mowed the lawn. I'd see his shadow behind the curtains when Sarah and I sat on our porch in the evenings. Once, while I was fixing a loose shutter on the side of our house, I looked up and saw him standing in his backyard, facing our direction, unmoving. Sarah noticed it too. "He gives me the creeps," she admitted one night as we got ready for bed. "It's like he's always lurking." "Maybe he's just lonely," I suggested, though I wasn't convinced myself. "Or socially awkward, or a complete weirdo." I laughed it off, but deep down, a strange feeling settled in my gut. One night, around 11 p.m., I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it, a faint sound coming from outside. Curious, I got out of bed and peered through the bedroom window, which overlooked our driveway. And I saw him. He was standing at the edge of our property, just beyond the street lamp's glow, half hidden in the shadows. His head was slightly tilted, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his coat. Watching. A chill crawled down my spine. I considered waking Sarah, but I didn't want to scare her. Instead, I grabbed my phone and turned on the camera, snapping a quick photo. When I looked back up, he was gone. After that night, the unease in our home grew. Sarah and I started locking the doors obsessively, double-checking the windows before bed. I considered installing security cameras, but I told myself I was overreacting. Then one evening, Sarah came home from work looking pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "I think someone's been in the house." I felt a wave of cold fear. "What do you mean?" She led me to the kitchen. The back door was slightly ajar, even though we both distinctly remembered locking it that morning. Nothing was missing, nothing seemed out of place, but something felt wrong. I checked the entire house, but there was no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had broken in. Still, that night, I slept with a baseball bat by the bed. A few nights later, it all came to a head. It was just past midnight when Sarah shook me awake, her face pale, her voice shaking. "There's someone in the backyard." My stomach dropped. I grabbed the bat and rushed to the window. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, a figure moved near the fence. The motion light clicked on, and I saw him, our neighbor, standing by the fence, staring directly at our bedroom window. My pulse pounded in my ears. I stormed downstairs, threw open the back door, and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" He didn't move, didn't say a word. Then, slowly, he smiled. Something about that grin made my blood turn to ice. I didn't wait for him to say anything. I slammed the door, locked it, and called the police. The officers arrived within minutes. They questioned us, then went next door to speak with him. But when they returned, their expressions were unreadable. "Nobody lives there," one of the officers said. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? The house has been vacant for over a year." I protested, told them about the man, showed them the photos, but when they checked the house, it was empty. No furniture, no signs of anyone living there, nothing. Sarah and I left that weekend. We stayed with friends until we found a new place. We never went back to that house. And to this day, I still wonder, if that house was empty, then who was watching us? My wife, Claire, and I had been married for just over a year when we finally found the perfect house, a modest, two-bedroom home in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago. It was everything we had dreamed of: a cozy backyard, a front porch where we could drink coffee in the mornings, and enough space to start the family we had always talked about. The first few days in the new house were a whirlwind of unpacking, organizing, and adjusting to our new surroundings. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, though we hadn't had a chance to properly introduce ourselves yet. Claire was excited about decorating, and I was just happy to finally have a space that was truly ours. One thing I noticed almost immediately, though, was the silence. Having lived in the city for years, I was used to the constant hum of traffic, distant sirens, and the general background noise of urban life. Here, however, the nights were eerily quiet, too quiet. The first time it unsettled me was our second night in the house. I had woken up around 2 a.m., thirsty, and went downstairs to grab a glass of water. As I stood by the sink, drinking in the silence, I could swear I heard something outside, a soft, shuffling sound near the backyard fence. I froze, listening. Then, nothing, just the wind rustling through the trees. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the unfamiliar quiet playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A few nights later, Claire and I were getting ready for bed when she asked, "Did you leave the back door unlocked?" I frowned. "No." "Why?" I found it open when I went to turn off the lights. A chill ran down my spine. I knew I'd locked it earlier. Maybe you forgot? Claire suggested, but there was doubt in her voice. I went downstairs to check the locks again. Everything seemed fine. The windows were shut. The front door was bolted. The back door was now locked. But as I turned off the lights and started back upstairs, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been inside. It happened 3 nights later. We had gone to bed early, both exhausted from work. At around 3:15 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. A thud, then a creak. It was coming from downstairs. I held my breath, listening intently. Claire stirred beside me. I nudged her gently, whispering, "Did you hear that?" She blinked awake. "What?" Another sound, a soft, deliberate shuffle. Claire's eyes widened in fear. Someone was inside. I moved as quietly as I could, reaching for my phone. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911. The operator answered, but I barely registered what they were saying. I whispered, "Someone's in my house." The creaking grew louder. Whoever it was, they were moving through our living room. Then a faint click, the unmistakable sound of a drawer being opened. They were searching for something. The operator was still on the line, telling me to stay calm, to stay hidden, that officers were on their way. But then came a noise that made my heart nearly stop. A footstep on the stairs. I acted on instinct. I grabbed the closest thing, a heavy glass lamp from my nightstand, and braced myself. Claire squeezed my arm, her breath ragged. The footsteps drew closer, one slow step at a time. Then, a shadow at the doorway. I didn't think. I swung the lamp with everything I had. It shattered against something solid, and a loud grunt followed. The figure staggered back, cursing. I lunged forward, grabbing at the nearest thing I could, his hood. I pulled hard, revealing a pale, unshaven face. For a split second our eyes met. His were wild, desperate. Then he shoved me backward, scrambling to his feet. From downstairs, sirens wailed in the distance. He bolted. I heard the sound of the back door slamming open, and then silence. The police arrived minutes later. They found signs of forced entry through a back window. Drawers had been rifled through. The intruder had been searching for valuables. But what terrified me most was the fact that he had come upstairs. If I hadn't woken up, if we hadn't heard him in time. Claire and I didn't sleep that night. We sat in the living room, wrapped in blankets, replaying every terrifying second. The police assured us they would patrol the area more frequently, that we weren't the first victims of break-ins in the neighborhood. But it didn't make us feel any safer.